Okay, moving forward, thanks everybody for their patience. And moving forward, we need to have a motion to adopt the agenda. Anybody?
I'll move that.
Okay, thanks Barb, and Pat Murphy seconded. Thank you. Declaration of pecuniary interest. Anybody have anything to declare? No, thank you. Okay, moving forward to the adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting, that the minutes of the March 30th, 2022 Cultural Center Feasibility Task Force be adopted. Could we have a second for that, please? Athol, how do you feel about making a second on that?
Oh, I'll move it or second it, whatever you wish.
Thank you. We have no deputations, we have no correspondence, so we're going to move forward to new business. And I'd like to introduce Julie from Norda City to make this presentation. And I would just ask that any task force questions or comments wait until after the presentation.
Fantastic. And I'm going to try to share my screen. I've got the button, so that makes me think I have got that. Do you guys see that as a nice big presentation?
Yeah,
oh,
it's
great.
There.
Excellent. And all right. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And I know you didn't have a lot of time with the report over a long weekend, and it's a ton of information to digest, but we're really excited to be here and be presenting the results of our feasibility study, or the draft results. So I've only populated about an hour of the agenda with Stephanie, but we have a bit more time. So happy to carry on as the discussion takes us. Remember that at March 30th, we really were going through phase 1 and phase 2 and through the interim report and looking at the results of those consultations and kind of validating those priorities. And that's what we took through now into phase 3, which is what we're really going through today, some of the findings there on all of these different aspects. You can see we're really moving from kind of the intangible to the more tangible stuff. So size and scale, location, design guidelines, capital costs and operating model, governance, and next steps. Now, this is really just kind of a repeat, just shows again our arc or our trajectory for the feasibility study. And we're now sort of right at the top there of our midpoint of phase 4. Looking ahead, here again, phase 3 is kind of itemized, and then phase 4, we're really working quickly to try to make it to this presentation to the committee of the whole next month or just in a couple of weeks. But we can talk about whether this timeline is feasible and depending on the discussion we have today and your feedback and how much of the report you've been able to kind of absorb over the past few days. So now I'm just going to, sorry. Actually, can you still see?
Yep.
And you can still hear me?
Yes, although it just disappeared.
So we, as we'll see in the report, the phase 3 analysis really brought the feasibility of the culture. Oh, no, you can't see?
No, not now.
Yeah, hi, Julie. Oh, there, you're back.
Oh, shoot, now I've lost the sound again. Okay, sorry. Now are we back? Sorry, I'm so thrilled this is all going to be captured on YouTube.
Okay, your audio's back, but the screen's not.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Oh,
oops, now it's gone.
It just wants to, it's just my connection here. Oh, there we go. Oh no. See if I just move a thing.
We have it.
Gone again.
Okay, wait, I'm just going to escape. What if I do it this way, but you just see all my stuff around it?
That's fine for myself. Is everybody else? Is this okay?
I guess yeah, it's at least it's not here. Let me see if I can. Okay, so I don't know why the connection was flickering there. There, we'll try again. Okay, so overall, Kawartha Lakes, as we found through the phase 1 and phase 2, Kawartha Lake requires a new cultural centers to support a range of community cultural space and programming needs. We presented design and construction recommendations in the report. In parallel or with that as well, the city requires a new archives and curatorial facility with its own kind of size and scale requirements and features also outlined in the report. The hub and spoke model that we were tasked to explore certainly holds some promise to support cultural programming and services throughout Kawartha Lakes, but still requires, based on the feedback we received, kind of further exploration and definition in order to really get that buy-in. Given these needs, there's an opportunity for a new facility to be built that combines the functions, both of these functions, and allows for the creation of a transformational cultural infrastructure, a piece of transformational cultural infrastructure, that being a culture center or cultural hub. Through our analysis, no specific site was identified as feasible at this time, mostly due to the size requirements, which are certainly substantial. However, our location analysis provides insights into the key factors that should be further considered in order to identify a site in the future. So this is the kind of overall arc the report takes you on towards, and we're going to talk about each dimension in more detail. And in fact, I'll hand over to Stephanie right away to talk about size and scale recommendations.
Great, thanks, Julie. All right, so where we left off at that last meeting was we had presented the Moscow, that must have, should have, could have, and won't have list. So that sort of defined the desired features of what were needed to support the arts, culture, and heritage communities through some sort of cultural hub. So we had that list of things, you'll remember archive, exhibition space, gallery. And so the next step for the size and scale analysis was to take those and put, as Julie said, the more tangible aspect to it. So assessing how much space in square footage would be needed for each of those items. So that's what this chart is showing. In the report, there is a much more detailed breakdown of this in the appendix, but I won't bore you with how we calculate circulation hallway size. But essentially, these are the options that were developed. And we provided two options for scale, either a medium scale or a large scale. And they both have the features, but there was a range in, if you were to look for a more medium scale that used a lot more adaptable, flexible space with overlapping spaces. So there's that one option, but if there's a preference for a much larger facility, then there's large scale. So the medium scale at 25,000 to 45,000 square feet, or the large scale of 37 to 65,000 square feet. I think we can go to the next slide. Actually, I'll just comment here, sorry, quickly. And then the column on the right side of the chart shows you for each item, and you'll notice in this that the archive storage is quite a large number, and that was due to throughout the process of the fact that the 31 Mary Street, the existing archives, will eventually need a new space as well. Yeah, okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. And then we go into location analysis once we have, the size. I think also the size is very exciting to know what scale we're looking at for a cultural hub for Kawartha Lakes and how much space is needed to really provide for the community. So then we take that and build on the location analysis. The location analysis started in the phase 1. We talked about that a bit, about reviewing the over 50 sites and existing assets just to understand what is already existing in Kawartha Lakes, look at their building condition assessment reports, what programming is there, the availability of the space, the site visits that we did, as well as responses from public consultation. So in phase 3 and 4, then to further define that, we take that size and square footage and scale calculation and apply it to a few shortlisted sites. So throughout this process, we took a few sites and did try to see if there is a way to fit that size of a building or a facility onto existing sites, either through renovations or adaptive reuse, or building new construction additions to an existing building, or even just building new construction entirely. All of these options were explored. But as Julie mentioned in the original conclusions, through this process, there was no one specific site identified as 100% feasible at this time. That doesn't mean that the cultural hub isn't a feasible idea, it just means that there wasn't a location identified right now. And the location analysis is still detailed throughout the appendix so that you can have the insights on what key factors were considered and should be continued to be considered for identifying a site in the future. Next slide, please. All right, and then the design and standards guidelines. This is quite a large section of the report. This is going again into defining what is the tangible, what is the built, what does this thing look like. We have this massive square footage, the medium and the large scale of how much space is needed. So it's important to also define what, not only what programming and how big that space should be, but what sort of design and standards it should have for different categories. So that's what this section breaks down. It has supporting culture through design excellence. So this section talks a bit more about design through choosing, quality materials, design that speaks to the type of innovative art, culture, heritage activities happening in the building, ensuring that that's reflected in the design of the building. This next section on leveraging heritage for placemaking is a reflection of a lot of commentary and feedback we got throughout the consultation phases, the desire to not just acknowledge all of the very valuable heritage assets in Kawartha Lakes, but also leverage them and understand that they are part of the placemaking of the community, and that should be really emphasized, whether if it is adaptive reuse or if it's even just building new, ensuring that you're building within this context of acknowledging the heritage. The next section was social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So this goes into things like ensuring, green standards, and that if you're building something new or adaptive reuse, you're trying to be as environmentally friendly as possible, but also sustainable from the way that people use it, accessibility, those types of things. Designing with Indigenous communities. This section outlines some feedback that we received from consultation with Curve Lake First Nation. And then archive and collection storage, outlining the very specific requirements that are needed for storage of archives to keep them safe, but also accessible to the public. So all of these are important in the document in that regardless of the size or scale that's chosen, that medium or large, as well as regardless of the final location selected, these design standards are there to ensure that the cultural hub aligns with these key elements that were brought up throughout consultation.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. So here I'm just talking through briefly some of how we translated those square footage assessments into our kind of first look at the, the biggest cost, the construction costs. And I would just say there's a big kind of caveat or note to readers in the report that says, these costs they're not quotes, they're not final figures. These are sort of meant to be a tool. The first time we're kind of looking at it all together and seeing what it looks like translated into a dollar figure. But there's still obviously these ranges are quite large, and even adjustments, adjustments to assumptions, adjustments to priorities can have a big impact. So we would caution from looking at this as in any way sort of the final bill, and much more of a starting point of the beginning of the journey of getting to the right cost structure. But again, you'll see that medium and large scale scenario presented here. So medium scale accounts for all the must-have features, and as Stephanie described, it's estimated maybe around 25 to 35,000 square feet. The construction costs can range between maybe 11 and 18 million here. When we look at the potential contribution, by no means guaranteed, but the potential contribution from the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund, which by their own sort of accounting can be an average of 37% of the total cost. So you might look at around 4 million for the medium scale. On the larger side, obviously almost doubling the kind of expectations here. We're looking at must have, should have, and could have aspects of the facility. We're looking at a square footage ranging from 50 to 65,000 square feet and a cost ranging from 23 to 35 million. But again, we see that CCSF contribution lift sort of in tandem as a part of the whole. And a very sort of obvious, maybe not that obvious, but conclusion or preliminary conclusion would be that that larger center requires a much higher capital investment up front. It's higher annual operating costs, and as we'll see on the next slide, it still could be more commercially viable than a smaller facility with fewer sort of programming options, less space to kind of leverage or translate into sort of potential revenue. So I'll just go to the next slide. Now, there's a ton more detail in the report and a huge appendix related to all the assumptions and the kind of comparables we looked at to arrive at some of these. I'll just say I forgot to mention the assignment of the construction cost is taken from Altus, their 2022 figures. It's kind of an average between, I think, the low end and the high end, but it's tiered to, office space gets costed at a certain space, gallery space gets costed at a certain, per square footage rate. So it's all, anyway, that's all detailed in the report. But how these costs, how Altus and how, we factor into something that might not be built for 5 years, there's going to be a lot of swings, and we couldn't kind of predict those necessarily just at this point, but this is a great starting point. So on this side, again, tons more information in the report, but we're just looking at a very high level at some of those, what are those earned revenue sources or other revenue sources, and what are the cost categories we're looking at, and how, what's the kind of impact here on our operating income. So again, that medium scale, this kind of reminds me, I think, Pat, on March 30th, one of your comments was, there's not a lot of revenue sources on that smaller scale facility. There's not a lot of, ways to generate revenue in the smaller facility. And as you see, it's really down to kind of some rentals, memberships, maybe admissions and tours. We would be looking at sponsorships, donations, fundraising, and grants, of course. On the expenditure categories, we factored in staffing, maintenance and utilities, marketing, operating costs, insurance, all of that good stuff. But even by year 5, you're looking at a kind of a net operating income of, or deficit, sorry, of nearly $500,000 or $460,000. So not unsubstantial. In the large scale, we kind of dial up some of that activity in terms of the types of rental space that's available. Maybe there's this cafe, the gift shop, not that a gift shop is funding an entire culture center, but there's more avenues here to work with, the co-working space potential, maybe more office rentals. The other revenue sources are comparable in either scenario. And of course, on the cost, you also have the costs associated with all of those different activities, whether it be the cafe and so on, and probably higher costs on kind of marketing spending. But your operating income by year 5, by our estimates, would be maybe a more manageable deficit of 140,000 per year. And again, this is kind of just a starting point for discussion. It's not meant to be something that we pinpoint down or get down to kind of the minutia of getting at the right number, but just to get an understanding of the magnitude of investment or costs at play here. I wanted to mention one other thing, but I am blanking on it. That's fine. We'll come back to it. Here for governance priorities and kind of the governance model. This is one place where we really tried to kind of translate or flow a lot of what we heard, even in our March discussion, but also throughout the study around, how this facility would be operated and run, and how it would sort of be infused with these priorities from the culture sector in its policies, in its staffing, and its procedures, and so forth. So we talked about the importance of community and culture sector input throughout, through this. Maybe it's an extension of this task force, but as moving forward to ensure that real balance of input to get the cultural center off the ground or in the ground. The importance of this shared service agreement or shared service model that needs to be explored, taking into account various ways in which this becomes kind of a shared space, and that there's policies around how artifacts move through the space and are shared amongst organizations, whether it's for those shared exhibits or storage or so on. And this shared service agreement was something that was described as a priority no matter where people were located. So whether it was Bobcaygeon, Fenelon Falls, Curve Lake, that there needs to be real kind of an understanding of how does this culture hub and the archive and the exhibitions, a shared exhibition or a traveling exhibition, how are they transported and moved around and safely stored and returned and all of that good stuff. And then really the rest talk a lot about the kind of what we've heard from day one, the balance of affordability and accessibility and inclusion working through the space and being embedded in its kind of policies and the governance model and kind of representation, and the importance of partnerships. So whether those partnerships be with, and this is also around sustainability, but with post-secondary institutions can be explored, with Curve Lake and Hiawatha First Nations and other Indigenous communities, other regional facilities, or whether that be the Canoe Museum, Peterborough, further afield, and of course all the cultural organizations that would be themselves either outlying hubs or spokes, depending how you want to define it. And of course that the building itself or the hub itself and the space itself needs to be really designed with Kawartha Lakes' future in mind and future growth and where this community is kind of is going. So those are some of the governance priorities that come through in the report. And next step, now we thought next step would be a good point of discussion. I could stop sharing. These are just a few things you'll have seen in the report, and you might think, okay, review and socialize the results of the study now. What does that mean exactly? And really, it's just about this forum, I think, and absorbing and just, absorbing the results, what we presented today, hearing from you, your feedback, and other, known or potential partners and stakeholders. Now that you see everything kind of packaged up, are there things that you have a strong reaction to? You might feel like you want to reassess certain priorities or assumptions, and we want to kind of test some of those assumptions and see how that would, almost kind of like, do you want to change your answer on anything? Is there something where you think, oh gosh, now that I see it like that, I'm much more open. I know I said adaptive reuse was the top priority, but maybe I'm much more open to other ways of looking at things. So maybe we can kind of talk about how the full report, your reactions and reflections on it, and then we'll go through some of the other next steps as well. But I'll stop sharing for now.
Excuse me, your sound is coming through very garbled here. I don't know if anybody else is having the problem, but it's very
just
difficult
on
to understand.
the last slide, Julie, it sounded like echoed.
You
still sound really echoed. Yeah, I'm not sure why.
Now?
I can't understand half of what you're saying.
Stephanie, do you want to lead for a second?
Yeah, do you want to go back to that slide, and maybe I'll just repeat. I'll attempt to summarize what Julie just said, and then we can go into the discussion. I think for me, it was just the last slide, which I don't have control of the screen right now. Julie, do you mind going to the last slide, please? Yeah, perfect. Next steps. Was it next steps for you, Ethel, too, or everyone? Was there any other slides?
It just started on this slide.
Okay. Well, this is, thankfully, it's just the last slide then. This is just the next steps in the report. There's conclusions and next steps. And the first one being review and socialize the results of the study. So that really just means taking in the study, seeing everything now on the table, and you know, assessing if what next steps you would like to see, and also if you know, if these I think one thing Julie said was, if you're interested in sort of changing any answers now that you see it on the table, do you think, you know, actually I said I really strongly feel this way, but now that I see it all in front of me, maybe I think this instead. So getting that sort of feedback. Also, I would add understanding your thoughts on the urgency, the conclusions that we brought forward are that there is a need for a cultural hub. We have the size, we have sort of design. And so I think there's openness to feedback on how urgent do you think, you know, does the next step need to happen right now, or is there a year to digest this, those types of things. And then we can get into, Julie, did you want to go over these next steps now, the undertake further site exploration, identify fundraising, or?
Yeah, how's my sound with headphones?
Still.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna leave and come back. I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay, well, while she's doing that, we probably want to wait for the discussion. Maybe I don't have screen sharing, but I can just read through. There was undertake further site exploration. So one of the things you mentioned was needing to do site selection. So steps needed to do that. Identify a fundraising and financing strategy. So once we're digesting the costs that were associated in the report, next steps on how to tackle those, things like with meeting with the Cultural Space Fund, refining the operating capital costs. As Julie mentioned, those are just the initial estimates, but once you get into a bit more detail, you know, if you're doing the medium or the large scale, things like that, you'll be able to refine the costing much more. Expand on the role of outlying hubs and spokes, and then also just initiate pre-building initiatives. So, you know, the next steps in terms of RFPs to actually design this building and move forward with those. So those kind of bigger construction next steps. But I think we will do sort of just question period now, discussion. I know that was quite a bit to digest, so we'll just wait for Julie to be back, and then I think we can jump into discussions. Hi, Julie.
Hi, how do I sound?
Better.
I restarted, but yeah, we can go back to that. I can go back to that slide, or but I think the step one was just, we just really want, we're kind of anxious to hear your thoughts and reactions. And whether you had or any questions, anything needing clarification. This was a pretty high level whip through of a pretty meaty or nutritious report, we sometimes call it. But so yeah, would love to get your feedback and your guidance on next steps as well, and where to take it from here.
Okay, no questions? Pat, I see a hand there, Julie.
Yes, thank you for the report. Very thorough and useful information. If there was a decision to move forward in pursuing a location, it sounds to me like we've exhausted current municipal properties that would be suitable, as you've looked at all the municipal properties and nothing has been identified. So I would say the next step is expanding outward from that and looking at properties that are maybe not currently municipal owned, And how can we go about taking the numbers that you have generated and working backwards to say, if, for instance, we were looking at a large scale model and we take an average price of your estimates and assume that it was going to be a retrofit building, working backwards, what would be the cost of the building compared to the cost of the retrofitting? And maybe we can find something on the market that fits those numbers. So I'd like to take all of the math that you've generated and work it backwards to basically making a shopping list to what can we go out and look for and in what price range so that we can actually move forward. I don't foresee there suddenly being a whole lot more municipal properties to look at. I think there's maybe a few that were disregarded in the process, but not very many. So is that a logical next step?
I think for the location analysis, and again, there's more detail in the appendix of, you know, every site that we look through. There were some configurations that it wasn't that they for sure not feasible, but they just weren't for sure feasible. So we weren't able to say yes for sure to the site. And by that, one of the examples I mean is the Ops Community Center site, how that building is slated for demolition, so the land is vacant. So that is one example that's mentioned in the report as it could be explored and selected as a location if, for example, you wanted a location immediately. But because of some other factors that we weren't able to confirm at this time, we didn't want to recommend it to you as the only available option, because as you point out, Pat, there could be, you know, you could expand the considerations of other sites. We did look into briefly a few non-municipal owned sites as well. We did through like the survey. We asked people to share if, you know, were you aware of any vacant buildings? It doesn't have to be city owned, and nothing came out of that. Similarly, we did very kind of preliminary research, just, you know, looking online, asking people in consultation, do you know of any building available that could be purchased? Nothing to come up, that would be the next step. So there is the retrofitting, but there is also the option of new construction on a vacant space. So that's part of also the location decision making. If you would like to go with the retrofitting adaptive reuse, then I think that's a bit more of a longer timeline, and that you just have to wait for a building to be available. Whereas if you go with a new construction on a vacant site, then it might be easier to get started sooner, but maybe it doesn't meet all of the desired features. But all of this is detailed in the report. Barbara, I see you have a hand up.
Thanks so much. Actually, my question will kind of piggyback on what Pat was asking. So the cost that we're looking at is really for retrofitting a current space that may have been available through a city building or city-owned land. But have we identified the actual size of vacant land needed to accommodate this size of building and parking spaces, so that we could be looking for vacant land as well, and the cost associated with that? Like, what should we be looking at in terms of total cost added to the project for having to purchase a non-city asset, because that will add significantly to this project. I have a few questions, so I'm going to ask them all and let you maybe answer all at once. So along with that, so there's some urgency, I understand, for the archives to be tended to because of the proposed expansion of the water treatment plant. Is there a time frame on that? And also the issue of the gallery needing to move out of the library space, is there a time frame on that? So I guess I'm looking at where's the urgency versus the availability. Maybe we should be looking at some interim options while we're discussing this future grand build, like depending on what's needed more urgently. So that's my first round of questions.
Okay, I'll go through them. The costing is associated to the square footage, which was calculated just like taking all of the programming, like you want a gallery, an exhibition space, it needs this much space. And then that essentially multiplied by a price per square foot for construction costs. So that would actually be the cost for either new construction or retrofitting. It really depends on specifically the building and the condition of it. But we feel that the number is an average enough that it is actually similar to renovations. But like, let's say you pick a building that needs a lot of repair, you know, that number isn't in the cost analysis because we don't know what that building needs repair. And similarly, the cost of buying a new site, we don't have that either because we don't know what the site would be. So the number that we're giving you is essentially just for the facility and the square foot, and sort of how Pat was saying, it's like a toolkit to then now apply this to almost like a shopping list. Like you're looking for this much space and it'll cost this much, and you know, where can we fit this size? And then you would probably add on the cost of this piece of land to that number as an example. And also the reason that the size calculations are broken down so much is so that there is a little bit of flexibility in that, you know, if you find a site and maybe it's not the biggest option available, but it fits most of the square foot, you can almost like Lego piece it to say, you know, we want this chunk and this chunk and this chunk. So that's why the report is broken down that way, to be really a toolkit for you for these next steps. Hopefully that answers that. Water treatment plant, I don't believe we have a specific finalized timeline on, other than long-term. So not happening this year, I would say is probably fair to say, but I don't know the timeline. And similarly for the gallery, I think it's maybe not long-term, but I'm not aware of an immediate like exit date for the gallery as an example. I don't know if Julie is aware. No, okay. So, but I think those are the types of questions in the next steps of determining the urgency. So those are all kind of exactly the right questions.
I know that we had asked this question previously, but I don't know if we've received an answer. Did we do any research into buildings that may be coming to available in the near future, such as used schools and those type of buildings? I didn't really notice something, but maybe it's in there. It was a big report, so I might have missed it, but I didn't see it.
We did ask Trillium Lakelands District School Board if they were aware of any buildings that would be coming available in the future. And they said that they aren't, or they don't have any. So on that's sort of the level that's mentioned in the appendix, but it is by no means an exhaustive, like we didn't reach out to every, you know, there's probably more places once you go through the report that you could determine you could reach out to. Donna, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it was just before our I almost said November, our March 30th task force meeting, when I met with the school board, and it's not completely like a hard no, but the province has put a moratorium on their long-term accommodation planning. So they certainly have an intention to do sort of an assessment of all their buildings and, you know, their use and sort of, you know, demographic changes and all that kind of stuff. But at the moment, the province, the Ministry of Education has put a moratorium. They're not allowed to. So it's kind of a funny question because as of right now, there aren't any buildings available, but that doesn't mean that once they're able to do their accommodation plan, buildings won't be available. We just can't access the information at the time because they're not allowed to do it.
I guess my question was, what about the separate school board and other school boards that are out there, some of them private?
Yeah, we didn't, I think because Central Senior had been part of the discussion when the working group had met before the task force started and before the study started. That was sort of the focus, to try to see if that building was at play while the study was happening. Certainly in the next phase, if that's the recommendation that's adopted and goes forward to committee of the whole and council, that could then be explored. I know that the Catholic ward is quite a bit smaller, and I'm not aware of private, but that doesn't mean that things like that, like, you know, Geneva Park and the Ontario Education Leadership property just got transferred ownership. And so things are moving in that sort of public realm, those public buildings. So that could be an option, and it's certainly something worth exploring.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions in that regard, Donna, I
think Barbara.
Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara.
Or is your hand still up?
I'm sorry. Was your hand up? No, please go ahead.
Sorry, I just was wondering if we're going to dig into the financial aspects and some of the other parts of the document, or are we just going to? Are we like going to go past the building part or into the operations part? I was just quite curious.
Well,
I have questions.
Do you have some?
I do have some questions about that.
Okay, well, why don't we lead with the questions?
Okay, so just looking into the structure of the revenue and the expenses. So I have a question. It looks like the city wants to open their own, like create this new entity. Is the gallery going to be folded into under the city umbrella for this, because they're taking the revenues and the expenses for the gallery and folding it into this document, or is it going to stay a separate entity with its own costs and revenues separated? Right. I do think some drilling down on some of these lines need adjustment, especially on the cafe and gift shop and the labor costs. And no raises were given. We know city staffers do get routine raises per year, generally. Has there been consideration for an impact study for the other organizations of how this build and the drawing of revenues and donations and grant monies will affect the other organizations that are also going to be competing? Because this shows the gallery, or a gallery, whether it's the Korth Art Gallery or whatever gallery is listed here, as being funded by the city for staffing, and the rest of us don't really get that. And if the city is going to be seeking the same grants that we're all applying to, it would be more likely the city will win those grants than the smaller organizations that are competing against the city. So we know that we're in a funding desert in this area. So I'm wondering, will a provision be made to address that with the other smaller organizations like Boyd, like Kirkfield, like the Kawartha Lakes Art Gallery, Museum and Archives. I can't even talk today. And for instance, the Globus Theater they've just started a capital campaign to raise $2 million to buy their land. If this new build has a black box theater, will that impact them now that they've moved to go forward, or will the city's capital campaign affect their ability to raise funds there? The museum as well is looking at doing a capital campaign for their own needs. Yeah. I'm just worried that by drawing funds to this large scale building with no, I guess, support for the existing operations, will the other operations survive? Will they be able to compete and draw the revenues that they need while the city's cultural master plan still kind of requires them to survive on a volunteer basis model? So maybe I would maybe request that for the next steps of this, to see how this and impacts that.
And a fundraising and impact study would be actually I think it's in one of our bullets, but I can add more clarity there around impact. But a fundraising study would be a kind of a classic next step around what's realistic and potential impacts, or as you say, almost like of course the aim or the goal is that this is something that lifts, everyone's lifted and they're supported, and headaches are alleviated, and things are taken care of here in this facility that are not currently taken care of, and it's solving challenges in order to, but you're right, we're getting into individual organizational strategy there that's out of our scope, but that's the kind of global vision, I suppose. But a fundraising impact study, for sure, we can add more detail around, the importance of it, or the, you know, that maybe it's a bit on the more, you know, it's a complex one, you know, that would need to be undertaken, and to have really realistic estimates there of what's, you know, possible, so that it's absolutely not doing the opposite of raising everyone's profile, but instead diverting. The other thing is, I think you're absolutely right around, we need to tease into that idea. Of course, we don't, we were looking kind of just broadly at, okay, the memberships and the tours, but of course, right now, memberships and tours stick to an organization, not stick to the building, right? And so that's part of the kind of governance structure, and what would change as a result of the selected governance structure, and how would this all work? And I think we've sort of asked a lot of questions and not necessarily provided the solutions. So that's part of the sort of what would need to be really ironed out in the next phase. But we can, we ideally are hoping that we will get through obviously today's questions and in this forum, and then also we're expecting more kind of scrutiny over the next couple of days, as you kind of, maybe with this discussion today in mind, look back and go, okay, you know, some feedback we've received is that our revenue estimates were a little optimistic, and our cost estimates were a little also optimistic. So we can boost. We just need kind of concrete. We based on some kind of comparable facilities, but with kind of concrete other sources, we can make adjustments and flow that through. But again, you might, funnily enough, you know, raising salaries a little might not have the same impact as kind of like, it's not going to nudge the needle as much. I don't want to pretend that doing small adjustments on these, on number of memberships or on things actually is going to change the big picture of what we presented. You know, but I appreciate any feedback there, because yeah.
Ethel?
I would like to support some of what Barbara was saying. There is one of the concerns of our membership is that this will actually turn out to be detrimental to them in the area of funding and resource management. And I've seen a little bullet point here and there in your presentation that you don't want to be detrimental to those organizations, but you don't go into any detail as to what you mean by you don't want to be detrimental. So, I mean, even the Medical Society says, first of all, do no harm. And I think that may be part of the concerns of our constituent members, is they're concerned that this will actually harm their operations and their sustainability because of the drawing of funds that Barbara brought up. Just something that I think should be somewhere in your report, what you mean by you don't want to be detrimental, which is a quote from your presentation here.
For sure. Maybe we can articulate that, and especially in the next steps as well.
Yes, so Julie, just speaking to next steps, I'd like to ask Donna if she could weigh in on what she foresees from the municipality side of things, what next steps would be.
Well, I think that certainly the Norda City with JAMO are doing a presentation at a committee of the whole, which is on June 7th, and report hopefully will be going to council for that June 21st meeting, maybe possibly depending on feedback, depending on the discussion that happens at committee of the whole. It could go to July, but our hope is that it goes to June. And the terms of reference for the task force ends June 2022. So it ends with the presentation to committee of the whole and the transference of the report to council. Depending on the task force recommendations to council, because you are a committee of council, typically in other situations, then carriage of the next phase would go internal, and our full public program, public consultation structure would be activated. So public meetings, surveys through Jump In, focus groups, public consultation, written format feedback, roundtables, I know that when we did the parking strategy, there were quite a few public meetings, both interim and also final reports. Everything is posted online. And so feedback is received that way. And then also, given the longstanding relationship with the cultural organizations, with Clack and Can, and also with the original 10 or 12, depending on how you count the historical societies, then there would also be consultation done that way directly with the groups as well. So that's kind of, because we're looking actually at building and properties, community services would probably have carriage of the sort of bricks mortar with engineering and corporate assets as support, and then economic development and clerks with archives could be the project manager. But of course that is, you know, the lead is through the CAO and the senior management team for that, to make sure that the right people are doing the right things when it comes to the departments that are going to be engaged in phase 2. And I think that the cultural places and spaces, or I think it's Canadian Cultural Spaces Fund now, it's called that now, that of course, I'm not sure whether that would be economic development or community services, but again, that's sort of what SMT would figure out, and the CAO's office would figure out. So I think, and this of course is all under the direction of council. And so I think that's kind of next steps in a nutshell.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Okay, if there's no further questions or comments, I'd like to put the motion forward that the feasibility study for a cultural centers in the city of Kawartha Lakes, that the study report and presentation be accepted as received, and recommend that council adopt the recommendations found within the study as presented by Norda City Consulting. We would be looking for someone to second, have some conversation and vote. What are thoughts on the motion? Yep, Barb,
So what is the actual recommendation to council? Is it to go ahead to proceed with one of these bills? Like, I'm not actually sure what the fulsome recommendation is.
To go ahead and accept the report as submitted.
Yes, but then you said to proceed with the recommendations, and I don't know what the actual recommendations are.
The recommendations were as reviewed by Julie and Stephanie, and they can be found, the conclusion and next steps can be found on page 35 of the report and page 36. So that's what we would be recommending. And you made, both you and Athol made some really good points, and that would be next steps it would come under the umbrella of next steps. But with us having had the opportunity, us being the task force, to review this presentation, to recommend to council that they accept it, we can start the ball rolling to focus on those next steps to meet the needs of the cultural sector in the city of Kawartha Lakes. This is just the beginning. It's just the end of chapter 1, and it's just the beginning.
I would be willing to second that motion.
Thank you, Athol. Now we would be looking for a vote. And who is in favor?
How can we look at here the members of the committee?
Well, I would assume, and I think it's a safe assumption from myself making the motion and you seconding it, that we have 2 positive votes. Yes. So I'm waiting to hear from Pat and from Barb and from Kathleen.
If you go into other than Kathleen, she'll have to actually say it, but if you go into the reaction button that runs along the bottom.
Okay, yeah.
Where it says mute, stop video, participants, the reaction one actually has raise hand.
Okay.
So that's what Pat's done. He's got his hand up. Oh, there, Athel's got his hand up. Oh, Susan now, yeah.
Well, and that's how
we can see each other's vote. Yep.
Okay.
Kathleen will have to do it. Barb, okay. Kathleen will have to do verbal if she can still hear us, if she still has her bar.
I can't see her. That's what I was asking about.
She just disappeared.
She's just by phone.
But she's no longer on the screen.
Oh.
Kathleen has left the call.
Yeah. I've just seen that too. Well, we have
so far as I can see, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 votes, and I guess that constitutes quorum.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you. This is huge. Thank you. Thank you to everybody gathered here today. My most sincere appreciation. This is not an initiative that's been going since 2015. This is an initiative that's been going for the past 30 years here in the Kawarthas. This is a significant milestone, and I thank each and every one of you for your time and your commitment.
Thank you too, Susan.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. We're actually
journey, another step forward.
Yeah, that's right. Well said, Athel. It's a significant step forward. Our next meeting, as per the terms of reference for the task force, we end come June 2022. So our roles and responsibility end with the presentation of the study on June 7th, a committee of the whole meeting. I'm sure all know that you can sit in. I'm pretty sure, Donna, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we can all sit in on the June 7th meeting via Zoom, I think. I don't know that they're open to public attendance yet. And
it's live streamed on the YouTube. I don't know about open, and I'm not sure about task force representation or anything like that, but I certainly can find out.
Yeah, but we can get some popcorn and a drink and sit and partake.
Well, there's actually, we could apply to the clerk's office for a deputation to that meeting if this task force so wishes. It's an opportunity to speak, and it is there. That's all I'm saying.
I think, Ethel, I'll just speak personally. This is a really good feasibility study. I think that what needs to be said can be said sufficiently by Norda City and Guillermo. Stephanie, did I get that right? I've been practicing it.
Jaimo.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll
it's okay.
More.
We're used to every variation.
So the only thing that a deputation could do is stand up and say that this task force supports, and be another voice that supports within the committee of the whole. That's just an opportunity that's there if we decide to take it.
Okay, well, no, I just shared my thoughts. Athel, you've shared yours. before we were to discuss this, I would ask Donna to maybe give some clarity around about this being considered.
Well, I wonder maybe if Susan could be part of the presentation, maybe as chair of the task force. I'm not sure if committees of council do deputations at a committee meeting. I don't, like, I would have to verify that with clerks.
I have been there, so I know that the deputation is allowed.
I would ask Donna if you could confirm that, and then we have till June 7th that we could revisit this conversation in a follow-up email to the members of the task force. This would be in that follow-up. It'd be a nice way to be able to connect with Tracy and Kathleen as well. So thank you, Ethel, for that suggestion, and we'll have Donna follow up and get back to us on that. And outside of that, we're looking at an adjournment.
I just saw one question from Barb in the chat.
Okay.
And I think our plan, we just want to kind of tighten up the report, proofread. This version that you have has not been proofread. I worry about some of the resolution of the images, all of that. So, but I think, Donna, the report and even today's deck, I might just sort out that next step slide to match what the next steps will because we're going to take into account your and Athel's comments in the next steps piece. Is that appropriate for the acceptance of the report? We sort of said it was including Athel and Barb's comments.
Okay, so maybe the motion needs to include, I just have to go back here, Donna. Can you, if the motion is that the report be accepted and received as presented, there's actually, I think, an edit to the motion as there's going to be some additions made.
Just out of today's feedback.
Yes.
Are Barb's and Athel's comments, are they changes that need to be done, or are they included in next steps?
Well, so they're going to come in mainly next steps, and I think we'll just maybe for the point about memberships and tours and all of that, highlight that would need to be part of the next steps. Like, this assumes that the facility is absorbing some of these revenue streams, which may or may not be the case in the future. But again, it's a sliver of the whole picture. So it's, but we just acknowledge that point, I think.
I think what I'm more asking is this document can be made publicly available so that the rest of the people in the culture sector will see it before the committee of the whole? Because right now, I believe it's still internal. And I'm just wondering if that would give others in the sector a chance to review it and perhaps make their own deputations or comments to you before the committee of the whole, for those that are not on the task force.
So it's slated to go back on to Jump In. Okay. And it's, of course, would be attached to the agenda for the report.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yeah. We just are going to proofread it, and it's just going to be a tightened up version.
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. Great.
So one of the things we could do is to put that with clarifications from today's meeting, as presented with clarifications from today's meeting.
Okay. Can we just edit that motion, or do we need a?
I think we can just edit it because we're all participating in it. So.
Okay, Donna?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So thank you. We're going to adjourn. And
thanks, everyone.
Yes. And we'll see you. We'll be in touch soon. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.